All right. Oliver Burkeman, welcome to the Transforming Anxiety podcast. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a great topic about your new book coming out in the States October 8th, which
Yep.
is at the time of this being published, was just in the recent past, called Meditation for Mortals, 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. Um, so I thought we would start by going back to your previous book, 4,000 Weeks, which of course kind of took the world by storm. I have to say I thought it was brilliantly marketed because the subtitle is Time Management for Mortals, and of course it's not a time management book at all, right? It's a like self-management or mind management, how do we
Yeah.
approach time, right? Because we have no way to possibly manage time. And it seems like you've done it again with this one. I'm curious to hear how you got from your career at the Guardian to here.
Yeah. Well, first, yeah, thank you very much for asking me to come on. There are sort of, I could talk about that for 2 seconds or several hours and bore everyone stupid. I think the simple thing to say is I wrote this column at the Guardian for many years, where one of the things I was doing was sort of exploring personal development philosophies and life management tips and tricks and all the rest of it. I started off doing that sort of in a sarcastic mode, if I'm honest, but I sort of got more sincere as I went on because I realized that I was actually quite deeply invested in the question. Um, I think that 4,000 Weeks was sort of the book that came after a sort of I'd sort of tested out so many ways of trying to bring order and calm and easeful productivity to my life that it's actually quite useful to get to test so many, because after the sort of 100th you begin to think, well, maybe the problem here is not that I haven't found the silver bullet yet. Maybe there's something deeper to be discussed. And so then 4,000 Weeks is a kind of exploration of what it means to be finite, what it means to have limited time in a life, in a day, and also limited control over that time. And then even then, it did a lot better than I was expecting, that book, which is obviously lovely, but also a little terrifying in all the ways that you can imagine. And so when it came to the next book, this most recent one, that's really about, to me, it's really about sort of action. It's about seeing that it's very easy to have all sorts of ideas about how you want to be living life and how you want to be showing up for life, and then just like not actually do that, do something else, and continue to sort of be much more sort of stressed and frenetic than you want to be. So I'm really trying to get in on a level of day-to-day action. You certainly don't need to have read 4,000 Weeks to read this book. I'm at pains to make that clear, but it's in the same theme in that it's all about how we sort of, how I think anyway, that the sort of path to a peaceful kind of productivity and a sort of energized and calm way of being is through really thinking about and embracing our limitations and leaning into them rather than trying to kind of outrun them and constantly try to optimize and do more and be more. So that's the basic idea. I don't know if I answered your question. I still do think of what I'm doing now as a sort of journalism in a sense, by which I mean, you know, I'm chasing down an idea and finding support for it or challenges to it wherever it is. I'm not writing a book in the Buddhist tradition or a book as a psychotherapist, which I'm not. It's just kind of everything that I can find that can illuminate the topic at hand.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something very countercultural and counterintuitive, but enormously relieving about really embracing both the infinite amount of things that are possible and things we could do and the experiences available and the places to go and the absolute finite
Yeah,
thing that is our life. Um,
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like something that would maybe be like pried from our hands, but when you can rest in like, oh, I'm on an infinite hamster wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of putting it. If there's a kind of overarching idea in the new book and in this sort of approach to life that I've labeled imperfectionism, it's really that it feels like it would be distressing and very unpleasant to sort of face the truth of our limitations, but actually when you really really face them, you get to another place where it's actually liberating and relaxing. um One of the simplest ways to put this comes from the first chapter of the book, is just this idea that actually there's a lot of liberation to be found in realizing that our problems are worse than we thought they were. I like the sort of contrarian nature of this argument, but I think it's true, right? If you think that getting everything done that needs doing is really, really difficult, but possible, you're going to make your life is going to be a struggle constantly to try to get to that place, and you're going to beat yourself up for not having got to it, and the whole thing is going to be a very, very agonizing and anguished way of being. But if you come to understand that the getting to the point where you've done everything that needs doing is impossible for humans, like not very difficult, impossible, because there will always be more things that you could very legitimately do and that would be worthwhile to do than you'll ever have time for. There's actually a liberation in that shift from very difficult to impossible, because then it's like, okay, I'm not going to beat myself up for not managing to do something that humans can't do. uh, and it's also kind of energizing, right? Because then you're like, well, okay, I can pour my finite time, energy, and attention into doing a few things that matter, instead of being on this, as you say, infinite hamster wheel to the point of doing all the things. This isn't on the cards for us as humans. There's no reason to believe that if something feels important, there must be time to do it. And there's something really liberating in like letting that sink into your bones, I think.
Yeah, I was talking with a student just yesterday and recognizing again the infinite amount of work ahead as I mean, she was a teacher, she has a home, she has children. It's like there's truly never an end to all
Right.
the work that could be done.
Right.
So in noticing, it was like, well, I guess if you worked this past weekend, I guess it's like, well, if we really thought that if I buckled down for this weekend, that I could move the needle somehow, we understand the temptation. Oh, okay, I'm just one weekend away from
Yeah.
truly accomplishing something, so I might as well get to it. But when you recognize that it's infinite, then you get your weekends back
Right. Yeah.
forever.
Yeah. Brilliantly put. And also, if you do decide to do some work at a weekend in that mind state, you'll be doing it because the thing in itself is worth doing, not because it gets you, or might with one last push get you to the state of feeling enough and adequate, right? But just because, yeah, there might be times when it was the right thing to do to put a bit of work in at a particular time that is the weekend, but you've still got your weekends back, right? Because you're still making choices as a finite human who can only ever do one thing at a time, and is never going to get to this place of, okay, now I get to feel okay about myself because I have achieved superhuman productivity or organization or whatever else it is.
Right. Okay, so in this vein, I have to admit, I find self-help books both wildly compelling because, I mean, really, what's a better idea than a manual for how to feel good, right? That sounds tempting. And also we recognize if we've read any self-help books, any amount of self-help books, of course, the world is just it's it's littered with really overly prescriptive claims, right? 5 steps to make this huge change in your life, for
Yeah.
3 months until you're a new person in this way.
Yeah.
And I refreshingly find your work to be the opposite of that. You sometimes jokingly give us a prescription. I mean, you say here 4 weeks to
Yeah.
embrace your limitations, which, spoiler alert, you go on to say, maybe.
you know yeah, if you
Right?
thought you could perfectly get there in 4 weeks, then you're missing my whole point. Yeah, exactly. um
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
I'm very pleased to hear you say that about my writing. I think we all, or not all, but me and you and probably a lot of people in the audience know that feeling, the sort of either the amazing excitement that like maybe this self-help book is the one that's going to solve everything, or even more funny and interesting is that feeling where from the very first page you know that it's just going to be the same old deal, like that in a few weeks time it's going to be a forgotten memory, but you're sort of doing it anyway with the final vestiges of hope that this is the silver bullet. And I really do firmly believe that that urge is it's very understandable, but and forgivable, but it comes from not wanting to feel the sort of discomfort of what it is to just be human and be finite. So what I wanted to do, what I want to do with this book, especially in terms of how it's structured, we can talk about if you're interested, is actually try to make it something that resisted as a book being used in that kind of like, okay, this is the new system. In a few weeks' time, when I get a spare moment, whoever gets a spare moment, when I get a spare moment, then I'm going to put this system into practice and change my life forever completely. But instead, actually be a book that, in the very reading of it and the very following of its thoughts, I hope, it might have a modest but real effect right there and then. And that's so much more meaningful than all the transformation in the world that remains purely hypothetical and off in the future somewhere.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next, which is this is called Meditations for Mortals. And you're using that word in the sense that these are ideas, they're teachings, they're lessons. You pull from a lot of different writers, lineages, right? Cultures, backgrounds. As this idea of like maybe try it on, maybe here's something to practice with, something to marinate on. And as a mindfulness teacher, this is kind of my approach and philosophy and working with all the people I work with is maybe, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly not a roadmap, which I know we are, and that's why we keep buying the books and reading the things and we're all desperate for, can I
Yeah.
just have the 72-step plan? I promise I'll execute it. I'm a really good student.
Right.
That it sounds tempting. And you throughout the book, you name for various reasons, and we could talk about that here too, why that's an impossibility in and of
Yeah.
itself. But I do love here's some ideas, but also put together in a 28-day, 4-week kind of like idea approach,
Yeah.
lesson book plan.
Yeah. I mean, no, I mean, I think there is a sort of there's a bit of a contradiction and a bit of a tension, but I think it can be a fruitful one. Um, it's not a joke, the idea that you might do it for 4 weeks, one chapter per day of the 28 chapters. That's my hope and my invitation. Although, given that so much of the subject matter is about what you can't control in life, I obviously have to realize that I can't control how people read my book. That's up to them. But I think there's something very beneficial about the idea of following that kind of a practice and taking it at that pace and seeing it as a project. Then what I hope is happening on the level of what you're actually reading in those little perspective shifts each day is that it's kind of wearing away at this idea of a silver bullet coming in the future. And as a result, sort of delivering you a little bit more, if it works, into your own real life. Because, it really vividly struck me when you talked about, people say, I want the 72-point plan and I promise to follow it as a really good student, right? That's the deal. It's this idea that, you know, we might find it's basically looking for a philosophy or a set of rules that would kind of live life on your behalf. It's like
Yes.
you'd say, like, I'll do all these things, and in return, I don't quite fully have to be here and navigate what it feels like to be a human. And of course, all good mindfulness teachers and teachers of, you know, bona fide spiritual paths and all the rest of it will push back against that because yeah, that way lies cults and all sorts of nonsense, but not actually a fuller engagement with life, which is what actually people are all seeking, whether they call it that or not.
Right. And the prescription that's so often offered, well-intentioned, this isn't to disparage any approach or hypothetical prescription that's out there, is often a hard one. Here's what happened for me. Here were my trials and tribulations. Here's what I had to endure and go through. And Eureka, I figured it out. So just come with me.
Right. Or just do the end bit, right? Yeah. So you don't have to, or
Yes.
maybe you don't have to go through all that. And it's like, actually, you do. No, I think that's so well put. It's like, if I go through a whole sort of process with my relationship to, say, just to pick an example, like clutter and organization, and I sort of go through all the inner work of figuring out what's going on there when I really hate clutter, or alternatively really can't bring myself to tidy up, whatever it is, and then I come up with like the 10 tips for how I keep my house organized now, it's like following those 10 tips is not going to help you, because you didn't get to go through that journey. And so, yeah, what I'm trying to do is really go take people on that journey, which is a journey that I have been through and I'm still going through, right? It's not like it's all live some sort of perfect existence. And actually sort of constantly be sort of hopefully gently like turning the reader back and back and back to like, no, let's just look at this and feel what it's like. Because the strangest thing is that kind of that's all it takes.
Yeah.
To the extent that you can actually just feel yourself right here and not avoid what's going on for real, all this stuff like motivation to do things and knowing what direction to take and all the rest of it, like, it might not always be easy, but like it happens
Yeah.
once that first thing is there, in my experience. I don't know about yours.
No, that's exactly it. I, of course, talk with pretty much everybody I get the opportunity to talk with about anxiety, stress, overwhelm, worry, concern. Big emotions that I think, again, in our society, we have a vocabulary around avoiding, numbing out to, resisting, trying to route around. And over and over and over again, I tell people, because they want to know, of course, does this work? Does what
Yeah.
I'm going to teach them, does it work? Right?
Yeah.
Just like I imagine people pick up these books and say, like we've joked about, okay, well, maybe this will be the thing. Maybe this will work. And no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it has to come through the lens and the filter and the aperture of you,
Mm-hmm.
and get fine-tuned on its way. And even if, I mean, clutter is such a great example because it's relatable and arguably low stakes. You may go through a process and come out to a different way of being around your home and organization and clutter. And I may go through the same, well, my process and experience, and we may even end up with 5 or 6 of 7 of the same 10-ish steps that we both come to.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't have landed the same for either one of us to try to shortcut and say, okay, Oliver, just do these things.
Yeah,
And
right, exactly. Just do these things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
No, that's true. And therein lies certain critiques of like reality TV shows that are based around going in and clearing up people's houses, I think. But anyway, so what I'm really, one thing that I think is really true is that like I'm often being asked by other people, but also like by my inner critic, it's like, what's the takeaway? What's the thing you can do here? And I really think I do, all the way through this book, I try to offer things to do and techniques and methods, but they very much are sort of suggested ways of putting a certain perspective into practice. The perspective shift is what matters, I think, the most. And anyone moderately smart, once they've understood a bit of what I'm getting at with the perspective shift, can come up with, how it would change their daily schedule or how it would change their to-do list or something. I do offer some pointers because that's always helpful, or hopefully, but it's the perspective shift that is actually the most practical takeaway.
Yeah.
And time and again, when I'm writing email newsletters, for example, I always find this phenomenon. Like if I talk about how, say, being overwhelmed feels, and I point something out about the feeling of overwhelm that maybe isn't easy to spot, and then I offer a couple of tips for dealing with it. Like it's the first two bits that people value the most in that. The
Absolutely.
tips are fine, like great, whatever. But it's having it articulated, knowing that you're not alone, and then just sort of saying, oh yeah, it's like that. And seeing that it's like that is weirdly empowering, just all on its own, regardless of any kind of, you know, now schedule your day this way or anything else.
Yeah, it drops us into more of here. To have somebody, I think this is my hunch is this is what is so compelling about poetry and writing and music and lyrics and just art in general is when we see or hear or read something that we have felt, that we have experienced through another's words, or even if it's a fictionalized version and we see like, oh yeah, I've done that dance. And we
Yeah.
see something outside of us that resonates. You're right. From there, I don't even need the 72-step plan.
Right.
It helps to just know that like, oh, this is human. This is what
Yeah.
it is to be
Yeah.
human.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally. And that, yeah. And obviously, some of the people who don't read self-help books with the enthusiasm that some of us do and don't understand why you would want them are getting that from novels and television dramas and all over the place. Right? It
Yes.
doesn't have to be, maybe it's more effective that way often anyway. Yeah.
I think it can be. I am a voracious reader, well, obviously, of mostly novels for
Right.
this reason. I do think sometimes it's more helpful to be dropped into a story
Mm-hmm.
and watch somebody navigate their life, which the details of which are always completely wildly different than
Right.
my own.
Yeah.
And yet I get to hear their thoughts. I get to see their machinations and their imperfections or their conversations. And it's like, ah, yeah, but this is how people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
Okay, so you mentioned uh problems earlier, and I wanted to, this was one of the many things that I flagged in here. And this is kind of what I was hinting at when I said I talk to people about anxiety all the time. And of course, people come, the first question pretty much everybody asks is like, okay, so how can we get rid of this? I have this problem,
Yep.
which is anxiety, and you and I were going to get together and solve that problem. And 100% of the time I'm say, no, we can't get rid of it, right? This is something to work with. It's something to understand. There's all of this to do with it. And you talk about problems. This is which page or which day is this? This is day 14. About how problems, how does, let's see. You needn't reflect for long on the subject of human limitation to see that the existence of problems simply follows unavoidably from the facts that this is all finite. The most abstract level, problem is just the word we apply to any situation in which we confront the limits of our capacity to control how things unfold. Which I think we could just stay with for a long time. Like, yeah. But you go on to say it only takes a little further reflection to see that we wouldn't really want life to be otherwise. Thich Nhat Hanh, he said, you don't know what your right side is without your left side,
Yeah.
which is it's a more neutral way of talking about we don't know what the good is without the bad or the hard
Yeah.
without, right? Without the easy. And it's nothing worth doing is not at first on some level problematic.
Right. Yeah. I think I could go in many different ways with this subject matter because I'm kind of a
Yeah.
bit obsessed with it. But I mean, yeah, we have this tendency to sort of doubly resent our problems. That there's the fact that a problem is happening is annoying in itself because whatever it is you've got to try to deal with. And then there's this sense that like you should have got to the point by now in your life where you don't have problems. And it's, for many of us, it's going to feel like it's our fault that we haven't figured out how to not have problems yet. And I think it's an amazingly powerful sort of reframing to realize that this is not the case, that, certainly there are specific problems one would wish on nobody, and hopefully you can get through your life without having, and all the rest of it. But problems per se are just, that's just called going through life, addressing yourself to things. And if there were none of those, I think life would be meaningless. So yeah, it's really useful. I find it's very useful in parenting, for example, to remember that it's like, if there's any meaning at all in the idea of like, am I a good parent or not? And it's probably not a great question to go around asking yourself anyway, but if there is, it's not in my ability to get rid of all the problems. It's in my ability to deal with each new one. And like any kid growing up is going to have or exhibit or cause problems by some definition of that term. Obviously, I hope not to have the worst kinds of problems in my parenting, but certainly any problems at all. That's the job, right? And it's same with work, right? It's like, if your job had no problems in it, it could be done by a machine. Like, your job is navigating the problems. And as a writer, I never question this, right? Like, I don't think, oh, I've got to work out how to structure this chapter. I wish I shouldn't have to work out how to structure this chapter. In that context, I'm just like, yeah, that's my job. And then suddenly I'll have some problem in like life admin, and I'll be furious that it even exists.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I again, as a mindfulness teacher, I remind people the idea of living in a mindful way, or of sitting down and meditating, is not that we are all of a sudden magically enlightened or compassionate, or like we've arrived at some place. The practice is I noticed that my mind just went off this direction, and bringing it back.
Mm-hmm.
If that weren't a thing, we wouldn't need to be mindful. We wouldn't need to meditate.
Yeah.
And you're saying something very similar of like the life. It's like what they say about how music is the space between the notes, right? Like, life is in the problems and the solving of them. And then, oh, guess what? There are more. And there's, to varying levels of success, more solving of them. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a sort of deeply seasoned meditator in the sense of formal meditation, although I've done a fair amount of it over the time. And I think that's what explains, or part of what explains, for example, the deep reluctance in the Zen tradition, for example, of Zen teachers to give you any instructions at all, right? Because there's sort of this sense that if the moment you get given some thing to do, you will conclude that it's your job to do it perfectly, that if you do it perfectly, you might somehow escape your situation, and you might escape reality somehow. And so, it's only one approach to teaching meditation, of course, but there's something that rings true about that, right? It's like any instruction is liable to be turned into this attempt to kind of get out of where we are, and really just sort of seeing that we are where we are is a huge part of the game. And yeah, including distractions when they happen. And if they didn't, you wouldn't ever be building that muscle of focus anyway, right?
Right. And it's, I think another temptation in adulting is there is a certain amount of low-hanging fruit that can be solved with, okay, if you do these kind of 3 steps with your money, you're generally on the right track.
Yep.
Or if you do these handful of things regarding food and hydration and sleep, again, you're generally on the right track health-wise. So that low-hanging fruit, I think we do fall into the facade of, there must be a more, the next level of strategy, right? the like postdoc plan,
Yeah, right.
that if I can grab onto that and again and again and again, you're right, in all of these different teachings and lineages, we see and we learn, and hopefully we start really experiencing and becoming more aware of, oh, yeah, as soon as somebody gives me something to do, I've gone off the path, essentially. I've I've I am distracted by the 72-point plan that was never my plan anyway.
Yes.
I just needed to stay right here and be with. I can just feel all the listeners rolling their eyes right now because I say this all the time. Can I be aware of it? Can I see what's happening? Can I sit? I mean, I truly think meditation is one of the safest ways that we can sit with the discomfort of being human and just see what comes up. There is no solution here. There's nothing to do.
Right.
Just
Right.
be more here.
Yeah. And I think it was a big step forward for me when I realized on quite a deep level, it's quite a felt level, that includes, I mean, maybe it's obvious to you and everyone in the audience, but it wasn't to me, that includes the not wanting to be here and the not wanting to be doing this and the desire to do something else. And those don't need to be suppressed because you are, your intention is to stay doing the meditation. They can be felt like everything else. The acting on them is a different question, but the fact that they arise is just, that's all part of it too. Yeah. Anyway, I'm done
Yeah.
meditation.
No, not at all obvious, I don't think. And it is one of, I talk a lot too about remembering to remember because it feels
Right.
very slippery. We happen upon it and we feel it for a second. It's like, oh yeah, I remember this. And then we just start washing the dishes or taking somebody to soccer practice and we forget right away until we need to remember, or theoretically, maybe ideally, if we're practicing with that muscle at some point, we get a little bit quicker to return back to like, yeah, it's in the practice. It's not in the doing or the achieving or the executing of a plan. Which, okay, similar to this, I wanted to ask you about rules. Us serving rules versus rules serving us. And in this idea, you pulled in a couple of my favorite writers and people working today, Dan Harris of 10% Happier and James Clear with Atomic Habits, and their ideas around, and they both just, I think, have a really refreshing approach to the work that they do, but like daily-ish, right? Don't skip 2 days. But this idea, this also blends in, of course, with your idea of imperfectionism, of maybe we don't have to be quite, and this comes from a very rigid person, me, quite so rigid with the rules.
Yeah.
Could we flip that paradigm?
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to really sort of, in these sections of the book, I think I've spent years and years and years of my life, consciously or otherwise, looking for the rule or rules that I could then sort of follow on autopilot, and the rules would take care of everything, and all you needed to do is follow the rules. And what really, completely predictably happens in that context is that the rules become sort of tyrannical. There's a sort of sense in which life loses, well, the word I use in the book, borrowing from the German academic Hartmut Rosa, is life loses its resonance. If all
Yes.
you're doing in your life is plodding through a series of rules, if you come up with a very detailed routine, say for your mornings, then one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to not work because other things are going to happen and you're going to get really annoyed that it's not working, or it is going to work and you are going to do it, and something is going to start to feel lifeless about the fact that you're living your life in a way that requires holding yourself to such rigid rules. So in the end, what I sort of, yeah, as you've already mentioned, right, the idea that I'm sort of getting at here is we need to keep remembering that rules are things that serve us, that we bring into our lives in ways that help us to the extent that they help us. And they can never do the job of living on your behalf, because apart from anything else, you're always ultimately deciding to follow it in every second, right, that you're following it. That's still your choice. That's still you acting spontaneously. So the funny thing about the question of being spontaneous or not as a person is that you can't really not be spontaneous, right?
Right.
You're
Despite our best efforts.
right. You're always just making a decision from moment to moment. Now, that decision might be to follow an incredibly rigid plan that you put into place in your Sunday evening review that accounts for every single hour of the week. But even then, you're actually showing up in each moment, and it's just a question of owning that instead of not doing. So yeah, and in the same spirit, I think what I'm trying to do once I've sort of got that idea in place in the book is, yeah, here are some rules. Here are a few rules that I think are useful, and by all means, take them from the big cupboard of productivity tools and anti-anxiety tools and life scheduling tools, but like see them as a cupboard of tools. See them as things that you, from your position in reality, sometimes choose to use to the extent that they serve you. So dailyish, the Dan Harris idea there, which he is talking specifically about meditation, but I kind of say, why not everything else as well? That isn't just self-indulgence. That isn't like, oh, just do it whenever you feel like it.
Right.
It really is discipline, because you know in your heart of hearts that doing something twice in a week is not doing it dailyish. And doing it 4 days a week at a busy time in your life probably is, and 5 definitely is. And, you know, so there's that kind of give in the system, which I think is really the sign of a durable and followable and kind of difference making rule.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he has all kinds of, and again, he's speaking specifically about meditation, but yeah, why not extrapolate it out to all of life? Let 5 minutes count. There's a real like purist approach of like, it has to be a silent meditation. You have to sit this certain way, and it has to be 20, 30, 60 minutes long. And it's like, so like, according to who? But really letting it be your own. And what you just said, I think is important of, yeah, in a busy season, or if you're not feeling great,
Yeah.
if you're traveling, 4 out of 7 days may be a pretty good showing.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
You know, I mean, and it's not just sort of, you're absolutely right to mention travel and things that happen in the external world, but also, yeah, just like moods. You don't want to
Yeah.
be, there's definitely a role for pushing back a little bit against moods, but you don't want to adopt a sort of habit program such that the first day you're feeling like you absolutely don't want to do that. You either have to force yourself and turn it into a huge battle, or you just give up the whole affair forever.
Yeah.
Far better to have something that can sort of work with those moods. I've got a friend actually who's a meditation teacher, and who, you know, is the kind of person who gets up in the morning and does 2 hours of oh, sorry, my camera just did something very strange. Hold on.
You gotta love the tech stuff.
Absolutely did nothing at all, and it
Oh,
just switched
yep.
to a different camera that is not functioning. Okay, sorry about this. 1 second.
Sure.
Figure out what the heck's going on. Sorry, I should have even checked that this is an edited kind of podcast, because otherwise,
It absolutely can be an edited
otherwise
sort of
this is ridiculous.
podcast.
Oh my goodness! So my phone is refusing to see. Let's see if I can. I might have to do a terrible thing here and come onto the camera in the computer,
Oh,
which is going to look ridiculous compared to where
oh,
I
there we
was.
go.
Is that acceptable? Do you
Yeah.
mind this, or would you like to wait a minute while this? The strange thing is that the phone I'm using as a camera which was charging through my computer, has somehow managed to not charge and to run out of
Ah,
battery.
yeah.
So if I sit here and wait for 5 minutes and it gets back up and running, I can be back onto that screen. Or if I
Perfect. No, this works. This is great.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I can see
So,
all your books behind you now.
yes.
No, this is great.
Right. Okay. So just
Uh,
carrying on as if nothing happened.
that's right. No, it's
Uh, just getting my train of thought. What were we talking about? We were talking about moods,
yes.
I think.
Yes.
Right. I have a friend who's a meditation teacher who is the kind of person who like gets up in the morning and meditates for 2 hours. And I did ask him once, like, you just must not feel like that some days. Like that just must happen. And he says, absolutely, it happens. And what he does then, he explained, was ask himself what he's willing, how much he's willing, how long he's willing to sit for. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it an hour and a half? No. Is it an hour? No. And it could get down to like 7 minutes, right? But there's somewhere that he'll hit. And it's like, oh, that's what I'm willing to do today. And
Yes.
how much more powerful to do that than to
Yeah.
just sort of call the whole thing off because you couldn't meet the perfect standards, you know?
Yeah, I think the moods and different circumstances of life are worth discussing and worth being aware of, particularly when we're talking about something like time management and productivity and just generally being who we want to be in the world, in the sense that we're not robots. Life isn't same. And there is to borrow from the Supreme Court justice who wrote this in his opinion, like, you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Am I just giving up, or is this a time to push through? And it has to be a case by case, kind of from your gut, just like what you were explaining with your friend who is a devout meditator, it sounds like, and teacher. Some days you're just not in the mood. And there's something interesting to doing it when you're not in the mood.
Yeah.
And there's some days where either you're tired or you're sick, or that would be forcing in a way that would be like borderline unhealthy and just kind of,
Yeah.
we're steering towards harmful. And knowing what that looks like. Sometimes I think we've all tried
right.
that too.
And it's all just navigating your way through the actual reality in which you are. Yeah.
This kind of comes back to these are the problems.
Yeah.
This is the life. This is the life. Okay, one other thing I wanted to be sure I asked you about, because I just kept returning to this part, which is about life tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So you write this, let's see, which page or which day is this? This is day 10. You say, by definition, a life task is something your life is asking of you. We can talk a little bit more about this. So while it might coincide with your parents' expectations or society's ideals, it also very easily might not. I wanted to suss out this whole idea of life tasks as again, as a group of people who tend to be very good at executing life's tasks, right? Work and managing households and parenting and just generally upholding what it is we quote unquote should be doing at this station in life.
Yeah. So this idea, I mean, the phrasing is kind of adapted from Jungian psychology, and there's a story about Carl Jung and his own sort of confrontation with these things. But the basic idea is that it can be really powerful sometimes to ask yourself, in a situation where you're stuck or overwhelmed or anything like that, like, what's the life task here? What is, in other words, what is reality asking of me here, as opposed to what do I want? What am I trying to get? What am I trying to achieve? I think it's a really powerful thing because there's a reason you mentioned, right? So Jung sort of talks about the idea of a life task, and he says, firstly, it'll be something that is you can probably only do by effort and with difficulty. So it's probably not going to be the thing that is easiest for you, the thing that comes most naturally, but it's also going to be doable. And yes, it's about life as opposed to the people around you in your life or the society or the values of your community, right? It is your life. And I think it's just very easy, very useful, because it just gives an extra perspective on, like, okay, if I just go through life on autopilot, I'm going to end up doing all the shoulds, probably, if I'm that kind of person. Or interspersed with periods of flatly rebelling and refusing to do any of the shoulds, because why should I have to do all these things, right? So it's going to be one or the other. And you don't want to spend your life just people pleasing or living out parental expectations that are not your own or anything like that. But you also don't want to spend your life like refusing to do that, right? You want to spend your life doing what your life is asking of you. And it is entirely conceivable that your parents want nothing more than for you to qualify as a doctor, and that is the right thing for you to do, right? That's possible. So I think the great idea about sort of trying to think about what life is asking from you, obviously what it really is doing on some level is connecting you to your own unconscious. But I think it's a very powerful way, even on a much smaller scale, right? Sort of just, what's reality asking of me this afternoon for the next couple of hours or something?
Yeah.
It's a way of getting out of that tangle of, am I just doing what I think I should do? Am I just rebelling against what I think I should do? And just clearing all that aside.
Yeah. I just thought I hadn't heard it clarified that way before, and I thought it was enormously useful to differentiate. We all know what that ping pong between being a real upstanding, here's all the shoulds, and I'm just knocking them out, right? Check, 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 check. And then outright rebelling.
Yeah.
Just screw it all. I'm going to do whatever it is I want to do.
Yeah, right.
We all know both of those extremes. So first of all, being aware that that's a thing, and having this more interesting middle ground of your life tasks, which is some combination thereof.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, might overlap, might not. I think that's really an important, that's where the freedom is. If you're just refusing to do what you think society wants you to do, then you're sort of as controlled by it as if you just do what you think it wants you to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something Michael Singer talks about in some of his work of yoking ourselves even more firmly toward the things either we don't want or don't like, by virtue of the fact that we are so rebellious and so opposed to them, that it's almost like we exist in direct opposition to it.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, it can be things that you yourself told yourself you would do
Of course.
3 days ago on your Monday morning plan, right? It doesn't even need to be explicitly identified as other people's demands.
Yeah, pretty classic. I thought I would conclude and ask you, I talk a lot too about how pretty much everything we're up to, it matters, and it just doesn't really matter at all. And that life in some way, shape, and form is can I just like lightly hold both of those truths simultaneously, of like, this matters and it's important, and I want to show up and do a good job and care for people and be on time and pay taxes and remember my zip code or whatever. And I could just phone it in for a month and it wouldn't matter.
Right.
It just wouldn't matter. And how do we live in the paradox of the two of those? And you wrapped up your book real beautifully with this sense of mattering as well. And I wanted to ask you about kind of this paradox of how do we make it matter and let it kind of not matter so that we can stay upright.
Yeah, I think I point towards some thoughts in that final section, but in a way it's like, this is a mystery that will never be remotely resolved. I think that, one way of thinking about this is that we we sort of drive ourselves a bit crazy with the standards that we bring to bear for mattering. We sort of tell ourselves that things have to, you know, survive for thousands of years or reach huge numbers of people, otherwise they don't matter. And we all know that's not true, because we all know that, you know, caring for a sick relative or making a meal for the kids is something that matters. You just know that in your bones. And I just think that on some level, probably mattering and doing something that matters and doing something that sort of brings you more fully alive are synonymous. Joseph Campbell, you know, and his talking about the fact that what people are looking for is not a meaning of life, but an experience of being alive. I think we can sort of, yeah, if you go through life thinking that the stakes are incredibly high for everything you do, well, that is anxiety in some sense, right? The sense that like something absolutely dreadful would happen if you don't get it right, or if things don't go the way you feel you need them to go. So sort of draining the importance from that and seeing what a tiny little pinprick of consciousness in the eons of cosmic time each of us is very therapeutic in that regard. And then I don't think you need to bring back in that kind of cosmic level of mattering to feel that your life counts, right? Because your life counts if you do things that help you and a few people around you feel more alive than they otherwise might have done. So I'm all in favor of, you know, caring about what matters, but really not selecting these kind of perfectionistic standards, which is what they are, of mattering, by which no human being could ever come out looking very good, because we're all so tiny and finite.
Yeah, absolutely. What did I neglect to ask, or what did we not touch on?
I think we covered a good range here. I'm sort of fascinated at the intersection of all this with anxiety, because that has definitely been, you know, a thing for me in my life. And I think that, you know, that idea of kind of seeing how inescapable human limitation is one of the greatest sort of salves for my own anxiety, because it draws my attention to how easy it is to sort of go through the day thinking, if I just do a bit more, not only will I get things fully sorted and I'll be on top of everything, but also like then I will be an adequate human being and I'll have earned my right to exist on the planet. And when you see that the standard you're setting for that is one you could never meet, it does open the doorway to wondering if maybe you don't need to justify your existence on the planet, or you already have, just by being here.
Just by being here. That's yes, that our self-worth, our intrinsic value is somehow, and I know a lot of people really grapple with that feeling of how productive or useful or helpful I can be on a daily basis at work, at home, in my community, is the thing that makes me me, or matter, or valuable. I know many people that those two are so closely linked that it, like, that's the tangle we have to lean towards. Um,
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just so much. There's this phrase that I use in the book and psychologists use, I'm sure you've come across, of about insecure overachievers
yeah,
being a label that so many people I talk to resonate with deeply, right? It's like we do a lot of stuff, we're very driven, we're energetic, but on some level we're doing it to fill a void or to make ourselves feel like we're okay. And it's so much nicer, if you can do it, to see that you're already okay just by being here, and then totally like do a whole bunch of stuff, help people, act, be in the world. This isn't about just like sitting on a mountaintop and doing nothing. It's about taking action, because no longer because you have to try to prove something to yourself about your adequacy, but because it's like life is more fun that way, building things, helping people, doing stuff.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting to recognize that because you're right. As soon as you hear insecure overachiever, you're like, ah, yes, that's what it's called. You don't even have to say anymore. I get it. And I think it's useful to recognize that we are surrounded by insecure overachievers. That's not just you either. So when you come into contact with somebody where things are coming out a little sideways, and it's like, this is your insecure overachieving that's just kind of like getting on everybody because of this situation.
Yeah, exactly.
I see it.
Yeah.
Then there's some, maybe ideally some compassion for, again, just the sheer humanity of being interconnected, but also a recognition, right? Of like, yeah, here we are, just humans being human.
All the same stuff. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just really find your work enormously refreshing and accessible, but also, I don't know how many times I've read 4,000 Weeks, 2 or 3 at least, and it lands different every time because you're in a different space. You hear it different every time you revisit, and I just, it's really, really meaningful and valuable. And I thank you for what you're up to.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that and for this great conversation. And sorry for the abrupt change in camera.
Oh, hey,
halfway through.
it's the problems.
Exactly. If it's not one thing, it's another. It's that Haitian proverb that I quote in the book: beyond the mountains, more mountains.
Oh gosh, I resonated with that one too. It's just more mountains all the way, right? It's like John Green, right? Turtles all the way down. It's just mountains and more mountains, and yeah. Tell the people where they can tell them about your newsletter. And again, we'll plug the book here before we go.
Yeah, so aside from the book, there's an audio version of that which I read. My website, oliverburkeman.com, has all this stuff. And yes, you can subscribe to the approximately once every 2 weeks newsletter, The Imperfectionist, there as well.
Yes, which is a fantastic read every time it comes out. So I thank you for that, as well. Oliver Burkeman. Yeah, the Meditations for Mortals, out in the United States, October 8th, 2024. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.